Delaney.
I'm Maddie.
I'm Susanna.
I'm Saar.
And our presentation is on the transition from apes to humans. So apes and modern humans share an ancient common ancestor, and in one direction, this ancient common ancestor evolved into chimpanzees, and in the other direction, it evolved into the modern day human. These lineages diverged roughly 5 to 10 million years ago, and there's a lot of conflicting information regarding exactly when this divergence occurred. While there are many more species that are contained within the hominid lineage, we chose to showcase just 5 because they show the greatest amount of change between them. We start with the chimpanzee, and we're using it as a comparison because it's most similar to the ancient common ancestor that we share. It's believed to have evolved 5 to 8 million years ago, and they are tree-dwelling animals with long arms and fingers. Here's a picture of them right here. They are quadrupedal with sharp canine teeth that are sexually dimorphic. Their diet is entirely plant-based, and they have grasping feet that allow for foraging in trees. And they exhibit traits that are typical of humans, but that are not seen in other apes, such as some semantic knowledge of words.
The earliest ancestor that we're going to be looking at is Ardipithecus. There are 2 Ardipithecus species, but we're going to be focusing on the Ardipithecus ramidus, which emerged about 4.4 million years ago. The fossils that were found were in the Ethiopia region, and they were only found in 1992, between 1992 and 1994, so it's a pretty recent discovery. And when they first discovered the fossils, they thought they were just Australopithecus, which is the next species we're going to be looking at. But after further research, they discovered that it was actually a new species, which they named Ardipithecus. The main fossil group that they found contained 45% of a full Ardipithecus creature. They named her Artie. It was a female named Artie. The behavioral analysis from the fossils indicates that the first ancestors were very chimp-like, so it had a lot of features that were still very chimp-like and not very human, so our first ancestors were still very monkeyish in their behavior. If we look at the body, you can see the really long arms and long fingers and toes for grasping, and that is because these were still tree-dwelling creatures. They had the ability to walk bipedally when they were on the ground, but when they were in the trees, they continued to move quadrupedally, which is obviously on all 4 limbs. Even though they did have the ability to walk bipedally on ground, it was very difficult for them to move for long distances because of the length of their grasping toes, which were needed to swing through the trees. If we look at the skull, and since this was such a recent discovery and so ancient, there's not a lot of research and not a lot of pictures that are able to be found, so a lot of this is recreations of things and not a lot of physical things on our board for Ardipithecus. They had smaller canines compared to the chimps, but larger mammals, or not larger mammals, larger molars, excuse me. They mostly ate rough foliage and like heavy barks, which were very difficult, so they had sharper teeth. The canines, however, were less sharp and less large than a chimpanzee, so it was the beginning of the evolution of the teeth. An interesting feature in Ardipithecus that was not in the chimpanzees was that the canine teeth in Ardipithecus were not sexually dimorphic like they were in the chimps, so the females and the males had very similar teeth and facial structures. If we look at the brain, there's no picture available like they were for the other, but it was only 300 cranial carrying capacity, which is smaller than a chimpanzee and only 20% of a Homo sapien capacity. So they had very small brains that are not able to do a lot of cranial things. With the brain size and the jaws and the teeth indicate that there was not a lot of aggression between males just because of the smaller teeth, and that's different from the chimpanzees, which typically have a lot of male and intergroup aggression and competition. So this was the first sign of a more sophisticated creature who had more civil relationships between males and groups. Okay.
All right, so the Australopithecus, it came into being about 4 million years ago, and the first specimen were found in South Africa in 1924. There are actually two main types, I guess, of Australopithecus, and that's A. afarensis, and then which is found in East Africa, and then A. africanus, which is found in South Africa. The Australopithecus was a very highly successful genesis, and it lasted about 3 million years. Okay, so the body, I want to point out the pelvis first. It's very short and bowl-shaped, which means that the glute muscles were brought to the side of the body, and this made it able for them to walk bipedally because it stabilized their trunk. And also their toes and their feet, the first toe was in line with the other toes, which means they were walking bipedally also. And they also might have had a human-like arch, which we're not 100% sure, but some fossils have shown that. And the toes are long and somewhat curved, which means that they were used to climb trees. They used their toes to climb trees. And their feet. So their forearms were long, and so were their fingers. They were long and curved, which also means that they climb trees to forage and potentially take protection from predators. Not 100% sure on that, but maybe. Okay, so they were generally small, and they were sexually dimorphic. The females were about 105 to 110 centimeters, and they were about 65 pounds in weight. And then the males were about 150 centimeters in height and about 90 pounds in weight. So difference in the sexual dimorphism isn't clear. It could have been because of the roles played in the groups. The males often hunted and gathered, and the females were often taking care of the young. So that's a hypothesis for that, or also males using their size to attract females. And then skull, so we can see here. They had many cranial features that were ape-like. They have a low sloping forehead and a projecting face, and they also have prominent ridges above the eyes. And their spinal cord emerged from the back of their skull base instead of the back, which I thought was pretty cool. Their teeth are intermediate between a human and an ape. The canine teeth were small and blunt, as in earlier humans, but their molar teeth in the Australopithecus were very large, and they had thicker enamel, which suggests that their diet consisted of like hard and low quality plant foods that required a powerful chewing process to swallow. And then the brain size ranged between 390 and 550 cranial capacity, which is similar to chimpanzees and gorillas, which suggests that the cognitive abilities of the Australopithecus was similar to apes and chimpanzees. So in conclusion, for the Australopithecus, one of the most famous skeletons found is Lucy. She was a skeleton with several hundred pieces of bone fossil, and it made up 40% of a female Australopithecus. And she was actually named after a Beatles song because in the campground they played that a lot, apparently. So most Australopithecus species were extinct about 2 million years ago.
Okay, so the Homo erectus were found to be roaming around around 700,000 years ago. They began to add meat to their diet, so they had more energy, and they were able to get their start eating meat because they had new tools such as hand axes and cleavers, so that way they could butcher their meat, their animals. They also had the first evidence for hearths, such as campfires, and these were used not only to cook food, but they were also used for warmth, interaction, and fending off predators. So their body, apart from their heads and their necks, they were very similar to humans today. Their height ranged from 4 feet 9 inches to 6 feet 1 inch, and their weight ranged from 88 pounds to 150 pounds. They had a larger body size compared to the previous species, so because of their larger body size, they required more energy, which they got from their new diet with meat. they also had a shorter digestive tract, so they were able to get the energy faster. And they lacked the forelimb for climbing, so unlike the others, they weren't able to climb. So they're land dwellers. They also had less body hair. So unlike what you see here, they had the Ardipithecus, the Australopithecus, they had a lot of hair. Here you can see that they're becoming more human, so they lost the body hair. So this is due to their heavy exertion now that they're more active. And this is a great advantage for cooling off. So for their skull, they had a thick skull, and similar to the Australopithecus, they had the sloping forehead. Their teeth was similar to humans, so it was smaller. So because they didn't have to use large teeth because they didn't have tougher foods to eat. Now they could cook them. And their jaw, they had a thick protruding jaw and no chin. For their brain, they had their average brain size was 930 cubic centimeters. So this was 69% of the brain size today. They had a slightly lower cognitive ability. So because this was due to their narrow frontal and temporal lobe. And at this time, they were able to adapt to changing environments because they had a flexible cognitive capacity.
All right. The last thing that we're looking at is human, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about a human just because obviously we all know what a human is like. But it was similar in size with the Homo erectus. Obviously, humans don't have very much body hair. They have the largest cranial capacity of any of the things that we are looking at, and it is 1350 cranial capacity. In a group with 3 psych majors, we obviously looked at all of the lobes with the language abilities and the complex thinking and learning and things like that. Much smaller teeth because we don't have to chew our food straight off of a tree. We have a lot of modern technology. And now we're going to look at a really short little video of the bone and face structures through the years. And you can see the protrusion of the jaw start to go back. You can see the forehead starting to slope less downward and more straight. You can see here we just lost body hair.
Do you know what groups those represent?
It's a very broad spectrum.
Okay. So it's going afarensis, rectus,
I think it includes all of them, like
All
not
of
just
them?
the 5
Okay.
that we showed.
Neanderthalensis.
Yeah.
And there you have a modern human,
Sapiens.
and then it goes backwards. You can see a lot of change throughout 6 million years is
Yeah.
what this video shows.
Wow.
There you go.
So now that we've discussed what types of changes occurred in the evolution of hominids, now we're going to discuss why those changes occurred. Up until Australopithecus, our descendants either completely lived in trees or spent time on both the ground and in trees. The environment in which they spent most of their time determined what their diets consisted of. And as you can see on the other side of this board, the skull shape and size of chimpanzees, Ardipithecus, and also in Australopithecus, massive and elongated jawbones are a defining feature of these species. And alongside of these large jawbones are massive spaces which held tendons, ligaments, and muscles that allowed our descendants to have an incredible amount of bite force. And they needed this incredible amount of bite force because their diets consisted of very tough and hard-to-eat foods such as very fibrous plant material. And the discovery of fire, which was about 3.4 million years ago, somewhere in between Australopithecus and Homo erectus, enabled our descendants to cook their food and to make it softer, which in turn made it very much easier to eat and to digest. And because food was now being cooked, there was not a need for such a massive space and such massive jaw bones. So transitioning from Australopithecus to Homo erectus and then to Homo sapien and modern humans, smaller ligaments and jaw bones allowed the cranium to continue to grow, which in turn was able to accommodate a larger brain. And this larger, more complex brain is the hallmark feature of our species. So we have the ability to have we have higher order cognitive processing, abstract thinking, more complex decision-making abilities, and so that's what makes us human. Questions?
So why the bipedal? Why the shift to bipedalism? What made that so useful for us?
I think it, can I flip it back over? With these early species and with chimpanzees, they're a lot more restricted into their nutrition because they're mostly tree dwelling, but when you have the ability to come down onto land, your food greatly increases and you have a lot more variety of what types of food you can eat.
Is there any evidence to suggest that some of these species like overlapped in like existences?
I'm not really sure. We
There's
didn't
just
find
a paper
anything.
that just came out about that.
We didn't find anything specifically in our research, but I mean, there's obviously transitional phases in between the ones that we chose to demonstrate for you. It wasn't just they died off one day and the next day you had a whole new species.
There was a paper that just came out. Just read about it last night. Let's see if I can find
Should have
That-
emailed it to us.
it. Huh? I bet I can find it in a minute. Or not. That said, I believe that Neanderthals and early hominids, early Homo, interbred. That they did exist at the same time and they actually reproduced together. Which would be like, you know, well, it's two different species, right? Other questions?
Wait, I have a question about what you said just now.
Yeah.
So in class you said that you asked us that one question about like if these two different species could like breed
Yeah.
and make us genetically viable offspring, then are they really two species?
Yeah, I know.
So what about the Neanderthals and the Homos?
Yeah.
Are they two different species or are they like?
Well, the evidence, I believe, is probably there's some genetic remnant, you know,
Yeah.
in the human genome that you can trace back to that.
And it kind of implies that we were only a recently diverged species at the time before we
Before they
managed to
went away.
outcompete them.
I mean, we're relatively young as a species anyway,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
As far as species life like spans go, we're pretty young. So yeah, that's true. It may have been early divergence. I can't find it now. Anyway, it just came out. Other questions? So, what would the reduction in the jaw would allow for the expansion of the cranium, but what might select for the expansion of, like, what might select for increased cognitive ability? If there's no advantage, there's a lot of energy to put into building a big brain, you know?
But there is an advantage.
What would that be like? What is it?
Well, the addition of fire led to, I can't remember who, oh, you were saying that it fostered more relationships
Okay,
between
so
people.
a social structure.
Right, and so when there's more social interaction, that I think calls for an increased portion of your brain to be used to support things, what we call now personality,
Mhm.
and interacting with different people and different other mechanisms such as those.
Who else has a question? You're running right down. One more question.
I asked a question.
Did you? That's
What
right.
about the first thing?
So how far back can you, this is out of curiosity, how far back can you trace social structure? Does it go all the way back? I mean, chimps have a social structure, right? So is that sort of ancestral for the whole lineage, is to have, or are there any solitary hominids out there? Or were they?
I think in a very primitive way, you can trace it, some things back to chimpanzees, but other things, especially when you tie motion into it, and social interaction, I think that's much more recent.
And obviously there were interactions between Ardipithecus because the research we found discussed aggression between males, which you have to be with other males in order
Mhm.
to have that aggression. So there was some type of group structure that led to the development of groups and bonding, dating all the way back to Ardipithecus, and you could argue even with chimpanzees as well.
Mhm. Certainly chimps have male aggression. Anything else? Okay.